I was staring at the massive granite boulders blocking my driveway when I realized my entire life in Colorado had led to this absurd moment. 3 enormous rocks, each probably weighing 2,000 pounds, sat squarely across the only road leading to my property in Pine Ridge Estates, just outside Boulder. I'd driven up from my construction site in Denver, exhausted after a 12-hour day, only to find my way home completely blocked. My truck idled behind me as I stood there in disbelief, the September evening air cooling rapidly as the sun dipped behind the Rocky Mountains. I'm Nathan Crawford, and I'd bought this property 8 months ago specifically because it offered something rare: privacy and independence. The 5-acre plot sat at the end of Ridgeline Access Road, a private easement that wound through the Pine Ridge Estates development before dead-ending at my gate. The developers had built the main neighborhood 15 years ago, but my land had been sold separately, maintaining its own deed and title. The access road was explicitly listed in my property documents as a permanent easement for my use. I pulled out my phone and called the number I'd unfortunately had to save in my contacts: the Pine Ridge Estates HOA office. Pine Ridge HOA, this is Deborah speaking. The saccharine voice on the other end made my jaw clench. This is Nathan Crawford. Someone has blocked Ridgeline Access Road with boulders. I can't get to my property. There was a pause, then a shuffling of papers. Oh yes, Mr. Crawford. The Architectural Review Committee approved the installation of decorative landscape features along the road this afternoon. They're quite lovely, actually. Really adds to the aesthetic value of the neighborhood. I felt my blood pressure rising. Decorative features. They're blocking the entire road. This is my legal access to my home. Well, Mr. Crawford, as you know, Ridgeline Access Road runs through HOA property. The board has decided to enhance the area. Perhaps you could park at the main entrance and walk to your property? It's only about half a mile. I have a truck full of tools and equipment. I'm not hauling everything half a mile because you people decided to play landscaper. This is a legal easement. You can't block it. Deborah's voice turned icy. I'll pass your concerns along to President Patricia Donovan. She'll be in touch. Have a pleasant evening. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there, my phone still pressed to my ear, trying to process the situation. The HOA and I had been at war since I'd moved in. First, they'd sent me violation notices for my barn, claiming it violated architectural guidelines. I'd shown them my property wasn't part of the HOA, and my deed specifically exempted me from their rules. Then, they'd complained about my truck, my fence, my dog, and even the color of my mailbox. Each time I'd sent certified letters reminding them I wasn't under their jurisdiction. But this was different. This was actual, physical obstruction of my legal property access. I walked up to the boulders, examining them in the fading light. They'd been professionally placed, probably with heavy machinery. Someone had spent serious money on this little stunt. A small bronze plaque on the nearest boulder read, Pine Ridge Estates Enhancement Project 2026. My phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Crawford, this is Patricia Donovan, HOA President. I understand you're upset about our beautification project. Patricia Donovan. I'd met her exactly once, at a neighborhood meeting I'd mistakenly attended thinking it was a county planning session. She was the epitome of what my sister would call a Karen, complete with the asymmetrical blonde bob, designer athleisure wear, and an expression that suggested she was perpetually disappointed in everyone around her. She'd spent that entire meeting berating a young couple about their Christmas lights being up past January 5th. Mrs. Donovan, those boulders are blocking my legal access. You need to remove them immediately. Mr. Crawford, the HOA board voted unanimously to install those landscape features. They're part of a comprehensive plan to increase property values in Pine Ridge Estates. I don't care about your plan. That road is an easement explicitly granted in my deed. Blocking it is illegal. She laughed, actually laughed. Mr. Crawford, you seem to misunderstand your situation. While you may not be technically part of the HOA, Ridgeline Access Road runs through our property. We have every right to determine how that land is used. An easement means I have the right to use that road regardless of who owns the underlying property. That's basic property law. Well, that's your interpretation. Our attorney sees things differently. The Boulders stay. I suggest you find alternative access to your property, or perhaps consider selling and finding a home that better suits your needs. I know several families who would love that plot for expansion. Good night, Mr. Crawford. She hung up. I stood there in the growing darkness, fury and disbelief warring in my chest. I'd spent 15 years in construction, working my way from laborer to project manager, saving every penny to buy this land and build my dream home. The house was halfway finished, a beautiful timber frame design I'd largely built with my own hands. I had 3 months until the first snow, and I needed access to finish the roof, install the windows, and get the place weatherproofed. I couldn't afford to waste time on HOA games. I drove back down the mountain and checked into a budget motel off Highway 36. The room smelled like stale cigarettes and defeat. I spent the night researching property law and easements, filling a legal pad with notes and case citations. By 3 in the morning, I was certain the HOA had made a massive legal mistake. An easement was an easement. They couldn't just block it because they felt like it. The next morning, I called my real estate attorney, Harold Brennan. I'd used him for the property purchase and a few contract disputes over the years. He was semi-retired, but still took select cases. Nathan, good to hear from you. How's the house coming? It'd be coming better if I could actually get to it. The HOA blocked my access road with boulders. I heard Harold suck in a breath. They what? I explained the situation, reading from my notes. Harold listened without interrupting. Okay, he said when I finished. This is actually pretty straightforward legally, but it might be complicated practically. You have a recorded easement. That means you have the legal right to access your property via that road, period. The HOA can't block it any more than they could block a public street. I'll draft a cease and desist letter today. Send it certified mail. Usually that's enough to scare people into compliance. And if it's not, then we file for an emergency injunction. A judge would order them to remove the obstruction, and they'd likely have to pay your legal fees. No judge is going to let an HOA block someone's property access. It's too clear-cut. Relief washed over me. How long will this take? Letter goes out today. They'll receive it tomorrow. Give them 3 days to comply, then we file the injunction if needed. We could have a hearing within a week, maybe 2. You'll have access again soon. Harold, I can't wait 2 weeks. I have contractors scheduled, materials being delivered. Every day of delay costs me money and gets me closer to winter. I understand, but we need to do this by the book. If you try to move those boulders yourself, you could be charged with property destruction, even if you're in the right legally. Let me handle this the proper way. I agreed, because I didn't have much choice. Harold sent the cease and desist that afternoon. I spent the day rerouting contractors and pushing back schedules, each phone call costing me more money and good faith. 3 days later, I received the HOA's response via email. It was a 3-page letter from their attorney, a firm called Whitmore and Associates in Boulder, arguing that my easement was ambiguous, potentially invalid, due to some arcane filing issue from 2018, and that the HOA's right to manage their property superseded my easement rights. It was legal nonsense, but it meant they were digging in. Harold filed for the emergency injunction the next day. The hearing was scheduled for the following Friday, 9 days away. Those 9 days were torture. I drove up to Pine Ridge Estates multiple times, each time confronting those damn boulders. I took photos, measurements, documented everything. I noticed other HOA residents driving past, some slowing down to stare. A few gave me sympathetic looks. One man, maybe 60 with kind eyes, stopped his car. "You're the guy with the property at the end of Ridgeline?" he asked. That's me. Nathan Crawford." "I'm George Hemming. I'm sorry about all this. Patricia has gotten completely out of control. Half the neighborhood thinks this Boulder thing is ridiculous, but she controls the board. Anyone who opposes her gets buried in violation notices until they comply or sell." "Can't you vote her out?" George shook his head. "She's got 3 other board members who do whatever she says. The rest of us don't have the votes. And honestly, most people are too scared to cross her. She's made people's lives hell for less." "Well, she made a mistake this time. I've got a court hearing Friday." George smiled. "Good. Someone needs to stand up to her. Good luck." Friday arrived with typical September weather in Colorado, crisp, clear, and beautiful. The kind of day that reminded me why I'd chosen to build here in the first place. I met Harold at the Boulder County Courthouse downtown. He was wearing a crisp gray suit, his silver hair neatly combed, looking every bit the experienced attorney. "Ready?" he asked. "More than ready." We entered the courtroom, a modern space with large windows overlooking the Flatirons. Patricia Donovan was already there with her attorney, a thin man in his 40s with slicked back hair and an expensive suit. Patricia looked confident, almost smug. She'd dressed conservatively, probably trying to look reasonable and responsible. Judge Rebecca Martinez presided. She was in her 50s, with dark hair pulled back and an expression that suggested she'd seen every stupid legal argument imaginable and had no patience for nonsense. "This is an emergency injunction hearing regarding property access," Judge Martinez began. "Mr. Brennan, you represent the petitioner." Harold stood. "Yes, Your Honor. My client, Nathan Crawford, owns property at 4850 Ridgeline Access Road. He has a recorded easement granting him access via the private road running through Pine Ridge Estates. The respondent, HOA, has blocked this access with large boulders, preventing my client from reaching his property and home. We're seeking an immediate order requiring removal of the obstruction." Judge Martinez turned to the HOA's attorney. "Mr. Whitmore, is it disputed that Mr. Crawford has a recorded easement?" Whitmore stood. "Your Honor, the validity of that easement is questionable. There are technical issues with the 2018 property subdivision that may have invalidated the original easement grant. Additionally, the HOA has a right to reasonably manage its property, including making aesthetic improvements. Reasonable management doesn't include blocking someone's only access to their home counselor. Do you have documentation supporting your claim about the easement invalidity?" Whitmore shuffled papers. "We're still researching the specific filing issues, Your Honor, but so you have no documentation right now?" "Not at this moment, but—" Judge Martinez held up a hand. "Mr. Brennan, do you have a copy of the recorded easement?" Harold handed her a folder. "Yes, Your Honor. It's clearly recorded and filed with the county. The language is unambiguous. My client has perpetual access rights to Ridgeline Access Road for the purpose of reaching his property." Judge Martinez reviewed the documents for several minutes. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of turning pages. Patricia Donovan kept glancing at Whitmore, her confidence visibly wavering. Finally, Judge Martinez looked up. "This seems exceptionally clear. Mr. Crawford has a valid recorded easement. The HOA has blocked it. Mr. Whitmore, unless you can show me concrete evidence that this easement is invalid, and I mean actual evidence, not research you're still conducting, I'm inclined to grant the injunction." Whitmore stood again. "Your Honor, the HOA has invested significant resources in this beautification project. Removing the boulders would be expensive and undermine the community's property values. The HOA should have verified they had the legal right to place boulders there before investing those resources. This is not the petitioner's problem. Is there any other legitimate reason these boulders cannot be moved?" I watched Patricia Donovan lean over and whisper urgently to Whitmore. He nodded and stood again. "Your Honor, we request a continuance to properly research the easement validity and present a full argument." Judge Martinez's expression hardened. "Counselor, you're asking to continue an emergency hearing about property access. Your client has blocked the only way this man can reach his home. Every day of delay causes him harm. Unless you have a compelling reason for a continuance beyond wanting more time to find a legal theory, the answer is no." Whitmore sat down, defeated. Patricia Donovan's face had gone red. "I'm granting the emergency injunction," Judge Martinez said, her voice firm. "The Pine Ridge Estates HOA is ordered to remove all obstructions from Ridgeline Access Road within 72 hours, restoring full access to Mr. Crawford's property. Failure to comply will result in contempt charges and daily fines of $1,000. Additionally, given the clear validity of Mr. Crawford's easement and the apparent lack of legal basis for the HOA's actions, I'm awarding attorney's fees and costs to the petitioner. Mr. Brennan, submit your fee documentation within 2 weeks." Harold nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." Judge Martinez looked directly at Patricia Donovan. "Madam, I don't know what you were thinking, but blocking someone's legal property access is not a minor matter. You're lucky Mr. Crawford chose to resolve this through the courts rather than simply removing the boulders himself, which he arguably would have been entitled to do. I suggest you and your board take a refresher course on property law before embarking on any future projects. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down with a satisfying crack. We stood as Judge Martinez left. Patricia Donovan practically stormed out of the courtroom, Whitmore hurrying after her. Harold turned to me with a satisfied smile. Well, that went about as well as it could have. Congratulations. I felt lighter than I had in days. Thank you, Harold. Seriously. My pleasure. People like that need to learn they can't just bully others into submission. Send me any documentation of your costs and delays. We'll include that in the fee petition. We shook hands, and I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Colorado sunshine feeling vindicated. The 72-hour deadline was Monday at noon. I half expected the HOA to ignore it, but Saturday morning I drove up to Pine Ridge Estates and found a crane service removing the boulders. A small crowd of residents had gathered to watch. George Hemming was there, and he waved when he saw me. "Justice prevails," he said with a grin. "Sometimes," I agreed. Patricia Donovan was also there, standing with her arms crossed, looking like she'd been forced to swallow glass. When she saw me, her expression twisted into something ugly. "This isn't over, Mr. Crawford," she called out. "You may have won this battle, but you're going to regret making an enemy of this HOA. "Mrs. Donovan, I didn't make you an enemy. You did that all on your own when you decided to block my road. I just want to be left alone to finish my house." "Your house is an eyesore that's bringing down property values for everyone here. You don't belong in this community." "I'm not in your community. That's the whole point. My property isn't part of your HOA. One of the crane operators interrupted. "Madam, where do you want these boulders? We can't just leave them in the street." Patricia turned to him, flustered. "I don't know. Figure it out. That's what we're paying you for." By Sunday afternoon, the road was clear. I drove up that evening, parked at my property, and just sat there for a moment, enjoying the victory. The house stood before me, raw timber and exposed beams, but beautiful in its potential. I'd built this with my own hands, every board and nail a testament to years of hard work. No HOA was going to take that away from me. Work resumed Monday morning. My framing contractor, Luis, arrived with his crew, and we spent the week making serious progress on the roof. The weather held, cool but dry, perfect for construction. I started to relax, thinking maybe Patricia Donovan had learned her lesson. I should have known better. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I arrived at my property to find a Boulder County inspector's truck parked at my gate. A woman in her 30s with a clipboard was taking photos of my house. "Can I help you?" I asked, approaching cautiously. She turned, professional, but not unfriendly. "Are you Nathan Crawford?" "I am." "I'm Sarah Winters, Boulder County Building Inspection. We received a complaint about unpermitted construction at this address. I need to verify your permits are current and posted." My stomach sank. "All my permits are current. They're posted inside the house. Follow me." I led her through the construction site, pointing out the permit placard visible through the front window opening. Sarah examined it carefully, took photos, and checked her tablet. "Okay, your building permit is valid. What about the septic system?" "I have the septic permit too. It's filed with the county health department. The system was installed and inspected in June." She made notes. "And the electrical?" "I'm doing the electrical myself. I'm a licensed electrician." I pulled out my wallet and showed her my Colorado electrical license, which I'd maintained since my early days in construction. "The work will be inspected before the final certificate of occupancy." Sarah nodded, making more notes. "Everything seems in order here. I'll file my report. Someone clearly wanted to cause you trouble with this complaint." "Let me guess, the complaint came from the Pine Ridge Estates HOA." She gave me a knowing look. "I can't disclose the source of complaints, but between you and me, you're not the first person from this area we've been called to inspect recently. The county is getting tired of nuisance complaints from a certain neighborhood organization." After she left, I called Harold. "They're retaliating," I said. "Code enforcement, inspections. Patricia said this wasn't over and she meant it." Harold sighed. "It's a common tactic. HOAs with vindictive leadership will harass people using every legal avenue available. The good news is you're actually following the rules, so their complaints won't stick. The bad news is it's annoying and time-consuming. Is there anything I can do? Document everything, every complaint, every inspection, every interaction. If it becomes bad enough, we could potentially file a harassment suit, but that's expensive and time-consuming. Often, bullies like this eventually get bored and move on to other targets. But Patricia Donovan didn't get bored. Over the next month, I dealt with 3 more code enforcement visits, a complaint to the fire department about burn permits I didn't have, and even an animal control visit based on a report that I was keeping livestock illegally. Each claim was false or frivolous. Each visit required me to stop work, explain the situation, and prove I was in compliance. My neighbors in Pine Ridge Estates started reaching out. Apparently, word had spread about my legal victory and Patricia's ongoing campaign against me. I received supportive emails, even some offers of help. George Hemming invited me to an informal gathering at his house where I met a dozen other residents who were fed up with the HOA's overreach. "She's getting worse," a woman named Susan told me. She was in her 40s, a software engineer who worked from home. "Last month she tried to fine me $500 because my garage door was open during the day. Can you imagine? My garage door. She said it was aesthetically unpleasant for people driving by." Another resident, Tom, chimed in. "She sent my wife a violation notice because our Halloween decorations were up 2 days early. 2 days. The notice threatened legal action if we didn't remove them immediately." George shook his head. "We've tried reasoning with her, but she's convinced she's protecting property values. In her mind, every rule violation is a personal attack on the neighborhood." "What about the other board members?" I asked. "Spineless," Susan said bluntly. "Karen Fletcher, Robert Mason, and Linda Armstrong. They vote however Patricia tells them to vote. She's got something on each of them, some violation she's holding over their heads to keep them in line." It was a depressing picture. An entire neighborhood held hostage by one woman's need for control. November arrived with the first serious snow. I'd managed to get the house weatherproofed just in time. The roof was complete, windows installed, and exterior doors hung. The place wasn't finished inside, but it was protected from the elements. I could work through the winter on plumbing, electrical, and insulation. Then I got the call from Luis. Nathan, we have a problem. The lumber supplier won't deliver to your address anymore." "What? Why not?" "They got a call from someone claiming to be county officials, saying the road to your property is unsafe for heavy trucks and deliveries are prohibited. The supplier doesn't want to risk liability." I felt the familiar anger rising. "Let me guess. Patricia Donovan." "I don't know, man, but it's messing up our schedule. We need that lumber for the interior framing." I spent 2 hours on the phone with the lumber supplier, the county planning department, and finally Luis again, straightening out the mess. The road was perfectly safe, there was no prohibition on deliveries, and someone had made a false report. The supplier agreed to resume deliveries but seemed skittish. That evening, I sat in my partially finished house, the propane heater running against the cold, and made a decision. I couldn't keep playing defense. Patricia Donovan wasn't going to stop unless something forced her to stop. I needed to change tactics. I called Harold the next morning. "I want to file a harassment suit against Patricia Donovan and the HOA board." Harold was quiet for a moment. "That's a big step, Nathan. It's expensive, time-consuming, and there's no guarantee of success. Harassment suits are hard to win." "Harold, she's interfering with my business relationships, filing false complaints and costing me time and money. I've documented everything like you said. I've got records of every inspection, every complaint, every delay she's caused. That's harassment, isn't it?" "It could be. Let me review what you got. If we can show a pattern of malicious behavior intended to harm you, we might have a case." I spent the weekend compiling everything into a detailed timeline. The Boulder incident, the code enforcement visits, the animal control complaint, the lumber supplier interference, everything. The pattern was clear and damning. Harold reviewed it and called me back on Tuesday. "You've got a case. This is pretty clearly a campaign of harassment. We can file suit for intentional interference with business relations, harassment, and possibly abuse of process for the frivolous code complaints. I have to warn you, though, this is going to get ugly. Patricia Donovan strikes me as someone who doesn't back down easily. I'm done backing down, too. File the suit. The lawsuit was filed the week before Thanksgiving. The HOA and Patricia Donovan personally were named as defendants. The suit asked for damages, attorney's fees, and a permanent injunction against further harassment. Patricia's reaction was volcanic. She posted on the Pine Ridge Estates Facebook group, calling me a troublemaker who was attacking the HOA for trying to maintain community standards. She organized a special HOA meeting to discuss the threat to our neighborhood. She sent a mass email to all residents warning them not to associate with me or support my frivolous lawsuit. But something unexpected happened. The residents pushed back. George Hemming posted a detailed rebuttal on Facebook, laying out the timeline of Patricia's actions against me. Susan shared her own stories of HOA overreach. Tom posted photos of his violation notices for minor infractions. Within hours, the Facebook group exploded with similar stories. It turned out half the neighborhood had grievances against Patricia and the board. The special HOA meeting turned into a revolt. I didn't attend, but George sent me a text summary. Standing room only. People demanding Patricia resign. She refused. Vote of no confidence failed 3-4 because her cronies on the board supported her. But the membership is furious. This isn't over. December brought more snow and more legal wrangling. Patricia's attorney filed a motion to dismiss the harassment suit. Harold filed a response. The court scheduled a hearing for January. In the meantime, the harassment actually decreased. I suspected Patricia's attorney had warned her that continuing to target me would only strengthen my case. I spent December working on the house interior, running electrical lines, installing plumbing, and insulating walls. The work was therapeutic, physical labor that let me forget about legal battles for hours at a time. My brother Daniel visited from Fort Collins and helped me install the kitchen cabinets. "You're really doing it," he said, admiring the space, "building your dream house." "Trying to, if the HOA doesn't derail everything. They won't. You're too stubborn to let them win." Christmas came and went quietly. I spent it at my parents' house in Greeley, enjoying my mom's cooking and avoiding talk about the lawsuit. But my dad, a retired contractor himself, pulled me aside. "Your mom's worried about you. This legal fight, the stress. She thinks maybe you should just sell the property and find somewhere easier." "Dad, I can't. This is my land, my house. If I let Patricia Donovan bully me off it, what does that say? That anyone with enough malice and persistence can take what's yours." He smiled and clapped me on the shoulder. "That's what I told her. You're doing the right thing. Stand your ground." The hearing on Patricia's motion to dismiss was scheduled for January 15th. Harold was confident we'd survive it. Motions to dismiss rarely succeed in harassment cases if you've got documentation, and you've got plenty. The real fight will be at trial if it gets that far. Most likely they'll want to settle once they realize how much this is going to cost them. The hearing went as Harold predicted. Judge Martinez, the same judge from the easement case, presided again. She denied the motion to dismiss, noting that the allegations, if proven, would constitute actionable harassment. "This case will proceed to discovery," she announced. "I'm setting a trial date for April 15th. Both parties should be prepared to present evidence." Discovery was brutal. Harold subpoenaed HOA records, emails, and meeting minutes. We requested documentation of every complaint filed against me and communications between HOA board members about my property. The HOA fought every request, but Judge Martinez wasn't having it. The defendants can't claim they didn't target Mr. Crawford while refusing to produce evidence about their actions, she ruled at a discovery hearing. All requested documents will be provided within 2 weeks. When the documents came, they were even more damning than I'd hoped. Emails between Patricia and the other board members explicitly discussed dealing with the Crawford problem and making him regret building there. There were discussions about creative enforcement strategies and leveraging county resources. Patricia had even emailed a board member saying, if we make his life difficult enough, he'll give up and sell. Harold was practically gleeful. This is what we call a smoking gun. Actually, it's multiple smoking guns. They documented their entire harassment campaign in writing. But the most interesting discovery came from the HOA's financial records. Harold noticed something odd in the expenditures. Gee, Nathan, did you know the HOA spent $45,000 on those boulders and the installation? That seems high, but I figured it was expensive. It is high, very high. And look at this. He showed me an invoice. The work was done by Ridgeline Landscaping, LLC. Guess who owns Ridgeline Landscaping? No idea. Patricia Donovan's husband, Michael Donovan. My jaw dropped. She paid her husband's company with HOA funds? Looks like it, and there's more. Over the past 2 years, Ridgeline Landscaping has received over $200,000 in HOA contracts, all approved by board votes when Patricia was president. That's embezzlement, isn't it? It's at minimum a serious conflict of interest, possibly fraud depending on whether she disclosed the relationship. Did she? We checked the HOA bylaws and meeting minutes. There was no disclosure. Patricia had never informed the membership that she was voting to award contracts to her husband's company. Harold leaned back in his chair. This just became a much bigger problem for Patricia Donovan. We need to inform the HOA members about this. How? Legally, discovery documents are confidential, but there's an exception for information that exposes fraud or illegal activity. We can notify the HOA board and membership about what we've found. They have a right to know their president has been potentially embezzling from the association. Harold drafted a carefully worded letter to the HOA board and all Pine Ridge Estates residents, detailing what we'd discovered in discovery. He sent it via email and certified mail to ensure everyone received it. The response was immediate and explosive. George called me within hours. Nathan, this is incredible. People are furious. Patricia's been stealing from us for years. There's talk of calling an emergency meeting to remove her from the board. Can they do that? According to the bylaws, yes. 20% of members can petition for a special election to recall board members. We'll have the signatures by tomorrow. The emergency meeting was scheduled for February 10th. I decided to attend, curious to see how it would play out. The meeting was held at the Pine Ridge Estates Clubhouse, a nice facility with a large meeting room. Every seat was filled with people standing along the walls. The energy in the room was angry and charged. Patricia sat at the front table with the other board members, her face pale but defiant. When the meeting was called to order, George stood up. Ushai. We're here because evidence has come to light that President Donovan has been awarding HOA contracts to her husband's company without disclosure, in violation of our bylaws and possibly state law. Over $200,000 in HOA funds have gone to Ridgeline Landscaping over the past 2 years. We're calling for her immediate resignation and an independent audit of HOA finances. The room erupted in angry voices. Patricia tried to speak, but she was drowned out. Finally, someone called for order. I did nothing wrong, Patricia said, her voice shaking. My husband's company provided quality services at competitive rates. There was no conflict of interest because the board approved every contract. A board you control, someone shouted. Did you disclose that Ridgeline Landscaping was owned by your husband? George asked. Patricia hesitated. Everyone knew. That's not true, Susan called out. I had no idea until this letter. You deliberately hid it. The meeting devolved into chaos. Karen Fletcher, one of the board members, suddenly stood up. I resigned from the board, effective immediately. I didn't know about the landscaping company connection. I voted for those contracts because Patricia said they were the best option. I feel deceived and used. Robert Mason, another board member, also stood. I resign as well. This is not what I signed up for. That left only Patricia and Linda Armstrong, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. George called for a vote. All members in favor of removing Patricia Donovan from the board, and as HOA president, say aye. The response was a thunderous chorus of ayes. Maybe 3 people abstained. No one voted against. The motion passes. Patricia Donovan is removed from the board. Linda Armstrong, as the remaining board member, I suggest you appoint interim members and schedule proper elections. Patricia stood up, her face red with rage and humiliation. You're all making a huge mistake. I've dedicated years to this neighborhood, and this is how you repay me? Fine. Enjoy watching your property values plummet without leadership. She stormed out, her heels clicking on the tile floor. The room burst into applause. After the meeting, George approached me. Thank you. If you hadn't fought back, we never would have discovered what she was doing. I just wanted to build my house in peace. Well, you did more than that. You freed the neighborhood from a tyrant. The next day, I received a call from a detective with the Boulder County Sheriff's Office. Mr. Crawford? This is Detective James Morrison. I'm calling about the Pine Ridge Estates HOA situation. We've received a complaint alleging financial fraud and embezzlement. I understand you've uncovered evidence through civil litigation. Yes, Detective. My attorney discovered contracts between the HOA and a company owned by the HOA president's husband, over $200,000 with no disclosure. Would you and your attorney be willing to meet with me and provide that documentation? Absolutely. Harold and I met with Detective Morrison the following week. We provided copies of all the financial records, emails, and invoices we'd obtained through discovery. Morrison took notes and asked detailed questions. This appears to be a clear case of theft and misappropriation of HOA funds, he said. Possibly fraud as well. I'll be opening a formal investigation. Mr. Crawford, I want to thank you for bringing this to light. Financial crimes like this often go undetected for years. What happens now? We'll conduct a full forensic audit of the HOA finances, interview board members and vendors, and build a case. If we find evidence of criminal activity, we'll present it to the district attorney for prosecution. The investigation moved quickly. By March, Patricia and Michael Donovan had both been charged with theft, fraud, and misappropriation of funds. The district attorney alleged they'd embezzled over $300,000 over 4 years through inflated contracts and phantom services. My harassment lawsuit was still pending, but Harold suggested we wait to see how the criminal case played out. If they're convicted, it strengthens your civil case enormously. Plus, they're going to be too busy defending criminal charges to fight you aggressively in civil court. The trial was scheduled for June, but in April, Patricia and Michael accepted a plea agreement. Patricia pleaded guilty to theft and fraud, agreeing to repay the HOA $275,000 and serve 18 months in county jail. Michael pleaded guilty to fraud and received probation with restitution requirements. With the criminal case resolved, Harold approached the HOA's new board about my civil lawsuit. Your former president engaged in a campaign of harassment against my client, as documented in the complaint and evidence. Given her criminal conviction and the HOA's liability for her actions, I'd suggest we discuss settlement rather than going to trial. The new board, now led by George Hemming as interim president, was eager to settle. They offered $50,000 in damages plus all my attorney's fees. Harold negotiated them up to $75,000, which I accepted. The money covered all my construction delays and legal costs with some left over. The permanent injunction was also agreed upon. The HOA would have no involvement with my property and would not file complaints or interfere with my access or construction. It's over, Harold said when we signed the settlement agreement. You won. But there was one more twist. In late April, I was working on the house when George drove up. He looked excited. Nathan, you need to hear this. We did a full review of the HOA's property maps and records as part of cleaning up Patricia's mess. Okay? Ridgeline Access Road? The one Patricia blocked with boulders? We discovered something interesting. The road doesn't just run through HOA property to reach your land. It continues past your property for another quarter-mile before it loops back and connects to 3 HOA-owned parcels on the other side of the ridge. I stared at him. What are you saying? I'm saying Patricia blocked the HOA's own access road. Those 3 parcels are designated for future development, but they're landlocked without Ridgeline Access Road. When she put those boulders up, she didn't just block your access, she blocked the HOA's access to their own land. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. You're telling me she blocked herself? Completely. We checked with our attorney. Your easement gives you access rights, but the HOA actually owns the road and needs it for their own properties. If you'd wanted to, you could have blocked the road yourself and prevented the HOA from accessing their development parcels. Why would I do that? You wouldn't. But Patricia was so focused on harassing you that she never realized she was shooting herself in the foot. Those 3 parcels are worth about $2 million, but they're worthless without access. She basically landlocked the HOA's most valuable assets to spite you. The irony was perfect. Patricia Donovan, in her zealous campaign to make my life difficult, had actually harmed her own organization far more than she'd ever harmed me. George continued. The new board wanted me to ask you something. We're planning to develop those parcels in a few years, which means we'll need to use Ridgeline Access Road. Your easement gives you rights to the road, but the traffic from construction and new residents might be disruptive. We wanted to discuss whether we could formalize a shared access agreement that respects your rights while allowing future development. What did you have in mind? We'd commit to maintaining the road, snow plowing, and repairs at HOA expense. In exchange, you'd agree to reasonable construction traffic during development. We'd put it all in writing with strict limits on noise, hours, and duration. You'd have full approval rights over the terms. It was a fair offer, more than fair. George was genuinely trying to be a good neighbor. Send me a proposal. I'm willing to work with you as long as my rights are protected. Absolutely. The days of the HOA trying to bully you are over. We learned that lesson the hard way. We shook hands, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months, genuine optimism. The war was over. I'd won. And more importantly, I'd helped free an entire neighborhood from a corrupt, tyrannical HOA president. The house was finished in July. I'd done most of the work myself, with help from contractors for the complex stuff. It was everything I'd envisioned: timber frame construction, large windows overlooking the mountains, a workshop for my tools, and enough land to feel truly private. The HOA settlement money had paid for some upgrades I'd originally planned to defer, like the stone fireplace and the expensive energy-efficient windows. I hosted a barbecue in August to celebrate, inviting my family, George, and his wife, Susan, Tom, and several other Pine Ridge Estates residents who'd supported me during the fight. We ate grilled steaks, drank beer, and watched the sunset over the Rockies. To standing your ground, George toasted, and to neighbors who have your back. And to HOA, presidents who forget that karma exists, Susan added with a grin. We all laughed and drank to that. Patricia Donovan began serving her jail sentence in September. I saw a brief article about it in the Boulder Daily Camera, including a photo of her looking diminished and defeated, nothing like the imperious woman who'd tried to make my life hell. I felt a moment of pity for her, but it passed quickly. She'd made her choices. She'd abused her power, stolen from her neighbors, and harassed anyone who challenged her. The consequences were her own doing. The new HOA board, with George as president, transformed Pine Ridge Estates. They streamlined the rules, eliminated the petty violations, and focused on actual community improvement rather than control. Property values actually increased once people realized the neighborhood was no longer run by a tyrant. Several families who'd been considering leaving decided to stay. As for me, I settled into my new home and life. The house was everything I'd worked for, a testament to years of hard labor and stubborn persistence. Every morning, I'd have coffee on the deck, looking at the mountains and the forest, grateful for the peace and privacy I'd fought so hard to protect. I occasionally saw HOA residents on the road. They'd wave, friendly and respectful. Some would stop to chat, always complimentary about the house, always apologetic about what I'd gone through. I'd thank them and move on, holding no grudges against people who'd simply been caught under Patricia's thumb. Harold called me in October with news. The Colorado HOA Regulatory Board is using your case as an example in their new guidelines for HOA governance. They're implementing stricter disclosure requirements for conflicts of interest and easier recall procedures for board members. Your fight is actually changing how HOAs operate statewide. That's good. Maybe other people won't have to go through what I did. Maybe not. You did a good thing, Nathan. You didn't just fight for yourself. You fought for everyone dealing with abusive HOAs. After we hung up, I sat on my deck and thought about the past year. It had been exhausting, infuriating, and expensive. But I'd won. I'd protected my property, exposed corruption, and maybe even made things better for other homeowners dealing with similar situations. The boulders that had started everything were gone, removed and relocated to some landscaping project in another part of the county. The road was clear and well-maintained now, thanks to the new agreement with the HOA. I drove it every day, remembering how it had looked blocked by those massive rocks, remembering my fury and disbelief. Patricia Donovan had tried to block my access road with boulders, thinking she could force me out through sheer obstinacy and abuse of power. She'd never realized that the road she was blocking was also the HOA's only access to valuable property. She'd been so focused on hurting me that she'd hurt her own organization far worse. It was the perfect metaphor for her entire approach to leadership. She'd been so convinced of her own righteousness, so determined to control everything and punish anyone who challenged her, that she'd become blind to the consequences of her actions. She'd stolen from the people she was supposed to serve. She'd harassed and bullied her neighbors. She'd violated the law and betrayed every responsibility of her position. And in the end, she'd lost everything: her position, her freedom, her reputation, and her future. Meanwhile, I had my house, my land, and my peace. I'd stood my ground against a bully with institutional power, and I'd won. Not through force or intimidation, but through persistence, documentation, and the legal system working as it should. Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in mid-November. I sat in my warm house, the fireplace crackling, and watched the snow blanket the forest and mountains. The road outside was quiet, peaceful, exactly as I'd hoped it would be when I'd first bought this property. I thought about calling my parents, my brother, Harold, or George to share the moment, but instead, I just sat there, savoring the silence and the solitude. I'd earned this. Every peaceful moment in this house was a victory over those who'd tried to take it away. The HOA had blocked my access road with boulders, thinking they could control me. They'd forgotten that rights matter, that documentation matters, that the law is supposed to protect people from exactly that kind of abuse, and they'd never realized until too late that they were blocking their own way out, too. The next spring, I saw the first signs of development on the HOA's parcels accessible via Ridgeline Access Road. True to our agreement, the HOA had submitted detailed plans for my approval, limiting construction hours and duration. I approved them, and the work began. 3 beautiful homes went up over the summer, purchased by families who seemed genuinely nice. They'd wave when they drove past, respectful of the road we now shared. One of the new homeowners, a woman in her 30s named Jennifer, stopped by one afternoon with fresh-baked cookies. "I wanted to introduce myself and thank you," she said. "George told me what you went through with the previous HOA board. The fact that you still agreed to share access for development says a lot about your character." "George and the new board are good people," I said. "I'm happy to work with them." "Well, we appreciate it. And if you ever need anything, please let us know. We're grateful to have a neighbor who stood up for what was right." After she left, I ate one of the cookies and smiled. This was what community was supposed to be: mutual respect, cooperation, and people actually caring about each other. Not rules for the sake of rules, not power for the sake of power, but genuine connection and support. My house became something of a local legend. When people asked George about Pine Ridge Estates, he'd often mention the guy who took down the corrupt HOA president. The story would get told and retold, sometimes with embellishments, but always with the same message: don't let bullies win, document everything, and stand up for your rights. I occasionally got emails from other homeowners around Colorado dealing with similar HOA issues. They'd heard about my case and wanted advice. I'd always respond with the same guidance: document everything, understand your legal rights, find a good attorney, and don't back down if you're in the right. The system works if you work it. By the second anniversary of buying the property, I'd settled into a comfortable routine. Work in Denver during the week, weekends at the mountain house, enjoying the life I'd built. I'd started dating someone, a teacher named Rachel, who appreciated my stubborn streak and loved the house almost as much as I did. We'd sit on the deck in the evenings, watching the light change on the mountains, and she'd ask me to tell the Boulder story again. "I can't believe they actually blocked their own access," she'd say, shaking her head. "How did Patricia not realize that?" Arrogance and obsession. She was so convinced she was right that she stopped thinking clearly. She wanted to punish me for not submitting to her authority, and she never considered the consequences. And now she's in jail. You're living in your dream house, and the HOA is actually functional. Justice. Justice, I agreed. Sometimes late at night, alone in the house, I'd think about those early days when the Boulders had first appeared. I remembered the rage and helplessness, the feeling that an institution with resources and power was trying to crush me. I remembered the temptation to just give up, to sell the property and walk away rather than fight. I was glad I hadn't. Fighting back had been expensive and stressful, but it had been worth it. Not just for me, but for everyone in Pine Ridge Estates who'd been living under Patricia's thumb. By refusing to be bullied, I'd inadvertently freed an entire community. The criminal justice system had worked. The civil legal system had worked. The community had eventually stood up and done the right thing. It wasn't always pretty or fast, but justice had prevailed. And every time I drove up Ridgeline Access Road, clear and open and well-maintained, I remembered those boulders and smiled. Patricia Donovan had tried to block my way forward, never realizing she was blocking her own way out. It was a lesson in the consequences of abuse of power, and I hoped it would be remembered long after I was gone. The house stood strong and solid, a monument to persistence and principle. The mountains stretched endlessly beyond, unchanged by human drama and conflict. And I was home, finally and completely, in the place I'd built with my own hands and defended with stubborn determination. The HOA had blocked my access road with boulders, and in doing so, they'd revealed their own corruption and destroyed their own president. Sometimes the best revenge is simply standing your ground and letting your enemies defeat themselves. I had stood my ground, and I had won.